It's a Thursday evening and time for Business Live. Good evening and welcome. My name is Emmanuel Abwaji. Coming up in this evening's edition, Finance Committee of Parliament deliberates on the approval of almost 11 billion cedi expenditure proposed by Finance Minister Setekpe for the first 3 months of next year. Corporate Ghana extends support to Farmers' Day slated for November 4 as Deputy Minister of Food and Agriculture urges private sector financing to complement government's efforts at developing agriculture. And also in this bulletin, cooperative unions in the country prepare to meet the new licensing guidelines by the Bank of Ghana expected to regulate their establishment and operations as well as safeguard funds of members. These are the headlines, of course, with other stories coming up on this program. You can stay interactive by tweeting at Joy Business GH and on Facebook, Joy Business is our page. We're taking a short break. The details shortly.
Business Live today is brought to you by GCB Bank.
Welcome back to the show. Now, over the years, the need to attract the youth into agriculture has been highlighted as critical in growing the industry to the benefit of the economy at large. Corporate Ghana has, in this light, been supporting the annual Farmers' Day celebrations in diverse ways. Some corporate institutions have reaffirmed their commitment to this ahead of this year's edition of the Farmers' Day slated for the 4th of November at Kintampo in the Abunahafo region. ADB Bank is, for instance, contributing a 3-bedroom house and other items worth 500,000 Ghana cedis as awards for the National Best Farmer to be announced next week. Speaking to Joy Business at the presentation ceremony, ADB's Group Head of Agric Finance, Sylvia Nyante, said their gesture is aimed at incentivizing the youth into agriculture.
Farmers' Day has been instituted to recognize the hard work and contribution of Ghanaian farmers to the economy. This year's edition is slated for 4th November at Kintampo in the Brongahafo region. Corporate institutions such as COCOBOD, ADB and Stanbic Bank have been making various contributions in support of the event. ADB is, for instance, contributing a 3-bedroom house and other items worth 500,000 Ghana cedi as award for the National Best Farmer to be announced next week. Speaking to Joy Business at the presentation ceremony, ADB's Group Head of Agricultural Finance, Sylvia Nyante, said their gesture is aimed at incentivizing the youth into agriculture.
We've also realized that we needed to get the young farmers to see agric as a business and not as a hobby. And so we felt that in honoring farmers who have dedicated their lives to the sector, it was going to impact positively on others to follow them, so that we don't have the mass movement of young people to the urban areas looking for white-collar jobs.
Stanbic Bank also presented a pickup vehicle as the prize for the first runner-up to the National Best Farmer. The managing director for Stanbic Bank, Alhassan Andani, also said this is in recognition of the huge potential the agric sector holds to the nation's economy.
We recognize that agriculture is a real opportunity for economic growth in Ghana. It is the sector that employs the largest number of people and indeed the sector that holds the greatest potential. So we've been very keen about agriculture, for some time now.
COCOBOD is also supporting the event with assorted items, including cutlasses and bicycles, among others. The presentation was held at the forecourt of the Ministry of Food and Agriculture. Deputy Minister Dr. Alhassan Ahmed Yakubu emphasized the need for more private support to complement government's efforts in developing the agric sector.
Cause of inadequacy that we have in the kitty, it will definitely impact on how much that is coming from the public purse as investment for the sector. But nonetheless, a lot of it is being done. particularly in trying to woo the private sector that have the money to do a lot of investment to the agricultural sector. It's not going to be possible for the public purse alone to sustain agriculture in Ghana, particularly that the sector is private sector dominated.
The National Farmers' Day is normally marked on the first Friday of every December, but has this year been observed in November due to the general elections. The event, which will be the 32nd since its inception, is under the theme Agriculture, a business response to economic growth.
Moving on, Finance Committee of Parliament is still deliberating whether to approve expenditure estimates for the first 3 months of next year. The Finance Minister, said Tepe, is proposing a 10.9 billion CD expenditure target, which would represent the first quarter of 2017 estimates. The approval would enable government to spend between January and March 2017, pending a new budget to be read by the new government in place that would emerge from the 2016 elections. Now, George Wiafe was in Parliament and now joins us on phone for some updates of this particular development. Good afternoon and welcome to Business Live, George. All right, so we are not able to link up with George currently, but we'll certainly get back to George. Meanwhile, the Member of Parliament for the Nandom constituency, Dr. Benjamin Kyerematen, has been explaining to Joy Business on the estimates yet to be approved by the Finance Committee. According to him, this interim budget will be attached to the 2017 full-year budget and presented to Parliament in the next government upon approval by the House.
This to look very, very different, and you expected to see a full-blown budget. You don't have that in this type of situation. And if you look closely on our financial administration and our constitutional provisions, you see clearly what is going on. A paper has been laid, and the paper is actually requiring parliamentary approval, because you know that by January, your 2016 budget would have lapsed, and you cannot spend public money without parliamentary approval. So what he's seeking to do is to come to be permitted to spend on account. When the real budget for 2017 is coming on board, they will bring back this expenditure on account, tidy it up together with the entire one, and then you get a full-blown one in which this one will be discounted for the first quarter. You cannot spend any money, even personal emoluments cannot be met if you do not get that parliamentary approval. Parliament has to, in fact, public money that has to be spent has to be approved by Parliament.
All right, so Dr. Benjamin Kyerematen is the Member of Parliament for Nandom constituency. Now, George Wiafe has just joined me in the studio here to give us some update on what is happening currently. George, good evening.
Well, good evening, Wiafe. Well, as we speak right now, Parliament is deliberating on the document that was submitted to what you will call the vote of account. Or let's break it down. This is your expenditure projections and revenue projections for next year. So those numbers, the Finance Committee has deliberated on those numbers, and then they have given it to the House to debate on these numbers.
All right, so earlier on, what did the Finance Minister lay before the House?
It wasn't laid. It was actually asked to take that document back to the Finance Committee for them to review the numbers. So that document has now been presented to the whole House for them to debate on it. And that's why that's what we are talking at 10.9 for the expenditure number. So government is hoping that whoever will be in power or whoever will be managing the economy come 2017, January 7th, would have a band to work with, or at least you can spend up to 10.99 billion Ghana cedis.
Before the full budget for that year.
Before the full budget for that year is presented by whoever is managing the economy, whoever is actually voted to be in government come January 7th, 2017. And for revenue, they're looking at almost 9 billion on this particular issue. But, you know, so these numbers have been trickling in and all those things. And when you look through the numbers again, you see that expenditure or what government is going to set aside for goods and services or for compensation, is going to be the highest item, almost 3.8 billion Ghana cedis.
What compensation?
Total compensation for public sector workers. That has to do with their salaries and all those things. That is the biggest item on the government table right now. But as the numbers trickled in, we've been engaging some economists and all those things. And Kyerematen is with Data Bank, and he's been also been sharing some thoughts on this. Let's watch him and see what Kyerematen has to say about these numbers.
Right.
They came across as expected, because from our own forecast of using historical and current situation, we thought that it's likely to come out at 10.7 billion cedis, and so we're not surprised to see something in the region of 10.9 or 11 billion cedis. So overall, the expenditure side looks quite as expected.
Let's look at the various items in the expenditure lines, and one would ask that compensation and the other things for public sector workers is still a big issue going into 2017. Are you also surprised by that one?
Well, first of all, I am not surprised again, and it doesn't come across as a surprise because you would expect that given the increase in the cost of living, there should be some adjustment on the nominal end of your income. And so we saw the government agreeing some amount of increase in public sector wages for the coming year, and that is reflected in the projections for compensations. And when you compare it with what we had same quarter last year, it seems there's just an increase of about 500 million, cedis. And so that, give or take, if you account for the agreed increase in wages, then roughly that is it. And so it also is not a shock.
Let's come back to the issue about deficit. And if you compare the numbers, if you just want to restrict yourself to revenue, i.e. expenditure, there's some slight deficit that it should be recording, if I'm right by the numbers. It looks like we won't get over with this problem of an overrun in every year as a country. Being a developing country, some would say it's normal, or you think that it's a little bit close deficit or it's too wide as a deficit?
I think it's a deficit that gives the indication that the government is working to restore a sustainable level of deficit. Now, we must also come to realize that as a developing country, that would need to spend to actually drive economic growth, especially in the area of infrastructure development. We have to run some amount of deficit. The sustainability of this deficit is what is key. And that's why even if you look at the ECOWAS convergence criteria, they did not propose a surplus budget. They proposed a budget deficit that is below and up to a maximum of 3%. And so anything crossing 3% for our level then leads us to unsustainable levels. So you see the indication that the government is trying to bring the deficit to a level that is perceived as sustainable. So
that was Kyerematen. He's head of the economic research at Data Bank, giving his perspective about this estimate or what they will call the vote of account. It is not a budget because we are not seeing any policy presentation yet. This is just the expenditure numbers and the revenue numbers for the first quarter of 2017.
Now, George, quickly before you go, are there any indications that the finance minister may not get what he's asking for?
Well, that's why it's a debate. And the finance committee is presenting its report. There's a likelihood that the numbers might be rejected. Even Parliament might even say that that's too small. So maybe go back and review the numbers. There's a likelihood also that Parliament could also review those estimates. And as we are trying to explain to our viewers, the argument is that when from January 7th there's a new government or anybody who manages the economy or the administration, you cannot even draw one pesewa from the consolidated fund without parliamentary approval. So this is very, very critical for them to do that. Don't forget the government has a band it was working with always, and therefore the band was between the 10 to about 12 billion. But it looks like the finance minister has settled on the almost 11 billion Ghana
Thank you very much. But what do we expect next? I mean, when do we finish with it?
Well, the appropriation, all other things being equal, should happen very soon. So then it means that come January 7th, if there's a new government in place and Yafe happens to be the finance minister, you can draw from the consolidated fund to do your X and Y things.
I can't think far on this. Thank you very much,
Thank you
George.
so much, Yafe.
All right, so that was George Yafe bringing us up to speed with developments from Parliament. Now, still on Business Live, cooperative credit unions in the country are preparing to meet the new licensing guidelines by the Bank of Ghana, expected to be introduced by the end of this year. The new guidelines are to regulate the establishment and operations of cooperative credit unions to safeguard funds of members. Speaking to Joy Business in an interview, Acting Registrar at the Department of the Cooperatives Credit Union, John Nyakun, appealed for a reduction in the service charge on credit unions by the Controller and Accountants General's Department.
There are about 504 recognized credit unions in Ghana as at the end of June 2016. The Bank of Ghana, as part of measures to regulate the country's financial sector, has hinted of coming out with draft guidelines to be used to regulate operations of cooperative credit unions. This regulation will, among others, place a limit on the number of members on a specific credit union at a given time. The guidelines, when implemented, will seek to enhance security of depositors and members of the various credit unions. According to the Acting Registrar at the Department of Cooperatives Credit Union, John Nyakun, the guidelines are necessary because they will help manage funds effectively and avoid the challenges that some microfinance institutions have gone through.
They are very prepared because a lot of them can meet the criteria very easily. Yes, they have the minimum membership that they have to operate with, the share capital, and that. It has nothing to do with the share capital. What they are talking about is prudent financial operations so that we do not have the problems of DKM and Co. Yes.
John Nyakun appealed to the Controller and Accountant General's Department to reduce the service charges on credit unions from 3% to 1%.
You meet them halfway by also telling the Controller and Accountant General to reduce the service charge. If they can go back to the 1% that they were charging, that will help them a lot, because 1% of the turnover, that's if they are taking loans and savings, they deduct it from source. If it's 10 million a month, they charge 1% of the 10 million. It has been increased to over 3%. So you can imagine if they are taking 10 million, the 3% on the 10 million as service charge, they will definitely pass it on to their members. Because if they are charging 3% on diminishing balancing and the Controller and Accountant General is charging also 3%, they will pass it on and charge 6%, which will become a burden.
Branding in business remains an important prerequisite for effective marketing of products and services. As a process of creating a unique image and name in the minds of consumers, the same can have devastating effects if a brand is not properly managed. The recall of Samsung's Galaxy Note 7 handsets from the market in September is said to have dealt a heavy blow not only to the range of mobile phones but also other Samsung products as well. Ebenezer Sabute has been exploring the extent to which this strategic action may have had on the company's products for a long time. He spoke to some stakeholders of the company who say, despite the setback, it can come out of its woes.
In September, Samsung recorded about 2.5 million of its Galaxy Note 7 handsets introduced onto the global market this year. This was after the banning of the device by some airline companies and in certain countries, including the United States. The situation emanated from the high propensity of batteries failing, leading to personal and property damage, and suffered considerable damage to the brand of the global market leader. Prior to the mishap, several orders had been placed and had to be cancelled thereafter. The damage was inevitable and very costly. However, the impact was more to be felt in other parts of the world where consumers are more conscious than in Ghana. Corbin Nkrumah is a die-hard user of Samsung who will not budge despite the problems.
There was a manufacturing error in the batteries, the batteries manufacturing. So it causes these batteries to overheat and then eventually explode. That's what they say, but till some other body proves otherwise, we can only take what they say. I personally think they would have to do something completely different, come up with a different device, because they have to earn people's trust again. Personally, I think I would buy it because, I'm a techie guy and I would know how to fix or do something to work around it. But others don't know, so they will be afraid to get it. So I think if I were Samsung, I would rebrand it and come up with something totally different.
Many reasons have been assigned to the company's brand management and what could have been done to avert this precarious situation. On his part, Dennis Mensah, A phone dealer at Circle Tiptoe Lane thinks Samsung hastily introduced the Galaxy Note 7 as it wanted to maintain their leadership position on the market.
We're taking a short break here. We'll be right back after this.
Another Thursday, you're welcome to the Business Agenda, powered by Joy Business. And today, the focus is on the agric sector, where the Chief Executive of Cocoa Buying Company, PBC, Maxwell Atakra, is making a fresh case for cocoa roads in the country, especially to be upgraded. This, according to him, is essential in cutting back on post-harvest losses and as well benefit the economy immensely.
You'll always be hearing of cocoa roads, cocoa roads. You see, cocoa is produced in areas which, unfortunately, the road infrastructure doesn't happen to be the best. Okay, so collecting the cocoa after you've purchased it from farmers, and moving it to points where it can be loaded and moved to port becomes a great difficulty. So once that infrastructure is improved, it definitely will come to enhance our operations in the marketing, purchasing and delivery of cocoa to port.
So what reaction to this call? Well, Senior Public Affairs Manager at Cocoa Board, Noah Amenya, agrees upgrading these roads is critical to cutting back on post-harvest losses and also to the benefits of the economy. And as part of efforts to address this, according to him, some roads in the cocoa growing areas have been earmarked for construction. A project, he tells us, is already underway.
Access to good road would enable us to be able to move the commodity fast enough and also to improve the local economy and make it more exciting for the farmers or the young ones to live in that community. That is why Cocoa Board has embarked on this road rehabilitation and construction activities. So far, we have launched about 2,340 kilometers of road, and most of it is bituminized because we want to have a permanent solution to the road reconstruction that we are doing. This constitutes about 195 different lots of road, and it is in all the 6 cocoa growing regions. So it is opening up the place, it is enabling us to move cocoa much faster. It is also helping the farmers.
So when are we hoping to have them in a position that we say maybe about 90% of roads in these areas are done, or 70 or so, and by which time?
It is a 5-year project for Cocoa Board. And so we do phase 1, we continue with the second phase. We will be doing that until 5 years. We'll take a stock of what we have been able to do and maybe say that, yes, enough of cocoa roads, or yes, let's still continue.
Noah Amenya is the Senior Public Affairs Manager at Cocoa Board. Do make a date with us next week for another edition of the Business Agenda. It is powered by Joy Business.
And in Interview of the Day today, another way of managing a company effectively is to be creative in all aspects of life. Do you know that a song or an anthem for corporate identity can have an effect on its productivity? Through the power of music, the Marketing Woman of the Year, Elizabeth Amedi Akutu, says she was able to bring back an enthusiasm into the business operations at the same time that it was needed most.
Marketing the brands. Okay, it's always making sure that the quality of the brands remain of the highest standard, and also communicating with our consumers and reassuring them of the quality of our products. If it gets really bad, we advise them to how to identify the original versus a counterfeit. But by marketing our brands and them being household names, it helps to go through such challenges.
Managing a large family like Unilever, do you remember the worst decision you take?
The worst decision?
Yes.
As a managing director, that's a good question. The worst decision. Funnily enough, it's a soft issue, which is that in-house we have a kind of anthem. We have a song that we sing to motivate ourselves and push us forward. And we changed our song this year, and that turned out to be not a good decision. It didn't, the level of energy. Exactly, it reduced the level of energy in the business. So I have boldly rescinded and gone back to our original song.
Sankofa.
Exactly, and you can already feel the business getting energized again and ready to take on the challenges.
Can you give her?
And it's a wrap on Business Live today. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed every aspect of the program. Join me again same time tomorrow. My name is Emmanuel Apwachi Biafi. Good evening.